years of prison if convicted of the top charge. President-elect Trump announced former Georgia Senator David Perdue as his choice for the next U.S. ambassador to China. NTD's Jack Bradley is in Palm Beach outside of Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. Jack, what can we expect to see from Perdue?
Good afternoon, Kerry. Well, we can expect that Perdue obviously has a history of being a China hawk. So as far as calling out the Chinese Communist Party, we can expect more of that. This comes in terms of his calling out them for intellectual property theft, as well as China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is a series of over 100 infrastructure projects over 100 different countries. But these projects have saddled those countries, many of them are third world countries, in billions of dollars in debt. Not only that, these projects oftentimes end up failed, whether they be dams or ports. And what happens is that they also serve as Chinese military installations. China just finished building a big port in Lima, Peru, just inaugurated that during the APEC summit. And as far as that was built, the U.S. officials say that this can double as naval deployments for the Chinese military, as well as espionage on the U.S. Back to you.
Jack, switching to another one of Trump's nominees, today the National Police Association came forward. They endorsed Trump's pick for FBI Director Kash Patel. What did they say about how Patel would lead the nation's law enforcement agency?
2 words: transparency and accountability. They're looking back at his record. They came out, this is a notable endorsement, by the way, as they represent over 240,000 police officers across the country. I want to read this quote for you, what they said in their endorsement. They said, quote, "The law enforcement community knows that effective leadership at the FBI is essential for building public trust and enhancing coordination across all levels of policing. Kash Patel's proven record of leadership expertise in counterterrorism and intelligence and ability to navigate complex legal and operational challenges make him the ideal candidate to restore faith in the FBI's mission and ensure it remains a steadfast ally to our nation's police forces." Now, Patel is the former Pentagon chief of staff, and we know that Patel wants to reform the FBI, particularly when it comes to gathering intelligence on U.S. Citizens. Now, for Patel, if he were to be, the nomination were to go through, the current FBI director, Christopher Wray, would either need to step down or be dismissed. Okay, back to you, Kerry.
Hey, Jack, one more while we have you. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance in North Carolina, still recovering, of course, from the deadly Hurricane Helene. What's the latest there?
Right, so Vance is down in North Carolina meeting with first responders today. Of course, this comes a month after Trump was down there on the campaign trail. Now, this is probably a follow-up to there, as they're still, under recovery efforts. It was a very deadly Hurricane Helene. Now, Trump has criticized the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, for not responding adequately to the disaster victims and the disaster itself. As far as FEMA, President Biden has called for Congress to pass a $100 billion package to fund FEMA. The FEMA administrator came out saying that they're almost out of money, that they wouldn't have the adequate funds right now to respond to any future natural disasters of Hurricane Helene. That's because we saw Hurricane Helene and Milton back-to-back, they said. Now, this comes as FEMA also has a program that oversees the housing. Members of Congress have called them out on this, but FEMA officials have assured them that funds were not being diverted from the disaster relief funds to the illegal immigration program. Gary.
That's NTD's Jack Bradley, keeping us informed from Palm Beach, Florida. Thanks, Jack.
Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have a plan. They say in a recent Wall Street Journal article that they will focus on 3 major kinds of reform: regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, and cost savings. Let's focus on cost savings, or ending federal overspending. Musk and Ramaswamy say they are focused on delivering cost savings to taxpayers. They say there's $500 billion plus in annual federal expenditures that are unauthorized by Congress, or being used in ways that Congress didn't intend. According to them, many federal contracts haven't been examined for years. They believe large-scale audits would yield significant savings. One source of expired authorizations is health care for veterans. which cost $119 billion in fiscal 2024, according to the Congressional Budget Office. But Musk and Ramaswamy haven't singled out veterans' health care. They're focused on the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which receives $535 million a year, international organizations that receive $1.5 billion in grants, and what they described as progressive groups like Planned Parenthood that receive almost $300 million per year. They point to reports of the Pentagon failing its 7th consecutive audit. The agency failed to fully account for its more than $824 billion budget. Musk has said the country could go bankrupt.
Our defense budget is pretty gigantic. It's $1 trillion, but the interest that we owe on the debt is now higher than the defense budget, over $1 trillion and growing. This is not sustainable. So we have to do something about that, or the country's going to go bankrupt.
Some critics of the plan say the 1974 Impoundment Control Act prevents the president from stopping expenditures. The act reasserts Congress's power over funding decisions, and it blocks the president from refusing to spend funds appropriated by Congress for a specific purpose. Ramaswamy and Musk believe the Supreme Court would find this act unconstitutional, but they haven't tested it yet. They say criticisms of their plan deflect attention from the real problems that are concerning to taxpayers: waste, fraud, and abuse. Their goal is to identify permissible executive actions that would result in immediate savings for taxpayers.
A federal appeals court panel upholds a law that requires the sale or ban of TikTok in the U.S.
The law requires China-based ByteDance to divest TikTok's U.S. assets by January 19th or face a ban.
TikTok and ByteDance argue the law is unconstitutional and violates free speech rights. The Department of Justice said the social media app poses a serious threat to national security as it has access to the personal data of a large number of Americans. Now, the DOJ also says that Beijing can covertly manipulate the information that Americans consume through TikTok.
Today's ruling came after the appeals court panel heard oral arguments in September. It could be appealed to the Supreme Court or a full appeals court panel.
The House has voted to pass the crucial Communism Teaching Act this morning. This bill aims to make a federal civic high school curriculum that will have students learn about the horrors of communism.
That's right. It'll teach that communism has actually led to the deaths of over 100 million people worldwide, understand the dangers of communism and similar political ideologies, and understand that 1.5 billion people still suffer under communism today.
The bill also wants to include a comparative discussion of certain political ideologies, including communism and totalitarianism, that conflict with the principles of freedom and democracy that are essential to the founding of the United States.
Included in the curriculum would be interviews, recordings, or writings from people talking about their personal experiences living under the covered political systems or ideas.
And now New York-based Shenyun Performing Arts is also warning about communist influence right here in America. The group says that the Chinese Communist Party wants to control American businesses and news media, and if Americans cannot recognize this, they'll be unable to stop it. Shenyun is an elite dance company that has been targeted by the Chinese regime for almost 20 years. Now joining us to discuss Shenyun's latest warning is investigative reporter at the Epoch Times, Joshua Phillip. Josh, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here. Thank you.
Now, you've been covering the CCP's influence here in America for over a decade. What do you make of Shenyun's most recent warning?
Well, what they're talking about, I believe, is the combination of propaganda and legal warfare being run by the Chinese Communist Party. And, while this may seem kind of new to some people, this is not new. The Chinese Communist Party has public programs adopted officially, publicly into its military doctrine, directing its military to work with different spy organizations to do exactly what they're saying they're going to do. The exact name of that operation is called the Three Warfares. That's psychological warfare, the creation of false narratives, media warfare, the controlling and gaining control of news outlets and outlets of information, and legal warfare, which is the manipulation of international legal systems in order to try to create legal incidents abroad using these as kind of the backdrop. The Soviet Union did the exact same thing. These are old communist tactics being used again under the Chinese Communist Party.
So Josh, I want to read to you a quote from the Xinyin press release, which actually touches on some of these issues that you mentioned there, especially related to the three warfares. Now, if we could just pull that up, it says, quote, "In the future, it will become frightfully apparent to the American people that the Chinese Communist Party has facilitated the spread of false narratives in mainstream media on a large scale. What is at stake is Americans' ability to prevent Beijing from controlling U.S. companies, the press, freedom of belief, and freedom of expression in the United States." So Josh, is the CCP really able to influence media companies right here in America? And if so, how are they doing this?
Absolutely. Absolutely, the Chinese Communist Party does this. On the lighter end of it, you can see it publicly. You can see how many news outlets operating in China refuse to cover sensitive topics in China because they'll be kicked out of the country. You could
Like
consider
New York
that the
Times.
lighter end of the CCP's pressure campaigns on news outlets to influence what they do and don't report. You can look, for example, what they do to Hollywood, what they do to the NBA, what they do to any kind of foreign asset business doing business in China. And keep in mind that a lot of these big corporations doing business in China also run a lot of the corporate media. Remember that China is one of the big investors, not just in TikTok, but in a whole lot of different social media companies. And we've seen openly the fact that anybody who criticizes the Chinese Communist Party, even working in American companies, if they have business with China, they get pressured, are fired sometimes, or whatever else when they make those statements. Look at the NBA. When NBA players have made comments against the CCP, and they begin facing pressure within their own organizations. Now, when it comes to the actual businesses and news media doing this, the Chinese Communist Party has different operations working on this. So when Shen Yun came out with this statement, I read it. It's really good, in my opinion, what they're doing. They name the organizations behind it. Now, the Chinese Communist Party's Ministry of State Security, that's the branch that runs things like Operation Fox Hunt, where there were Chinese agents on the ground in the United States who were targeting Chinese dissidents, Chinese individuals who fled the Communist Party. You had Chinese agents in America under Operation Fox Hunt threatening to kill people in this country, threatening their families back in China, trying to make them commit suicide in order to protect their families. Those were things we know for a fact publicly because our own government exposed it. The CCP was doing in America. That was the MSS, Ministry of State Security. Alongside that, they run these operations through what's called the United Front Work Department. That's the Chinese Communist Party's network of agents of influence, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and influence operations. And the CCP has agents on a large scale that go to business leaders, journalists, social media, influencers, and try to get them to repeat the CCP's slogans, to try to get them serving the interests of the Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party has been doing this for decades, creating different paths of influence of people they can manipulate to carry out these exact operations. And I believe, actually, that because the CCP is exposing its hands by attacking Shen Yun now, they're exposing this network. And I think the CCP, as they note, I think this will be exposed. And I think the American people will come to realize exactly what the CCP has been doing, and also how different news outlets in America have actually been working for the Chinese Communist Party.
And this is something that a lot of Americans actually find hard to believe is actually happening right here on American soil. Now, speaking of these paths of influence, there is this new report from the Falun Dafa Information Center that actually documents how China's equivalent of the FBI and the CIA combined is also focusing its efforts on spreading propaganda through overseas social media. How much impact can that have on people living here in America?
It can have a large impact. As I mentioned, the CCP has a military program dedicated to that. They call it the Three Warfares. This is not a secret program. They have public reporting on it. In fact, you even have a lot of U.S. military organizations who tried exposing it over the years. Also, this ties into the Chinese military branch focused on what they call political warfare. And Congress in the United States, even in October, had a huge 300-page report trying to expose the CCP's operations, what they call political warfare. Now, the way this works, it goes back even, you can look at Soviet programs for this. The purpose of propaganda is to elicit a political response. The purpose of propaganda is to create a political response within the targeted country. And so what they do is they spread lies, they spread false narratives. They might even, for example, hack a person's computers, hack a person's, phone calls. Notably, right now we have a massive Chinese Communist Party telecom breach that just happened. They breached the phones even of President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance. They can steal information and then leak that information to media. Iran just did this, notably to J.D. Vance. Iranian hackers, during the presidential campaign in the United States, hacked again the President-elect Donald Trump's campaign information, stole a docket on J.D. Vance, and then leaked that to the media. That is a clear example of this exact type of operation, which the Chinese Communist Party also does. The Soviet Union would do the exact same thing. They would take, for example, they'd have their agents raid a person's home. They would find or plant evidence, and then they would create narratives to alter the interpretation of the evidence, trying to reframe the narrative of what a person meant in a statement, and then use that to try to go after them legally. This is common tactic, not just of the Chinese Communist Party, but with most communist dictatorships and most totalitarian countries in the world. This is a common tactic, and the CCP, I think, is exposing itself by doing this.
But Josh, we see China's economy weakening, and as more people become aware of the CCP's human rights abuses, they're distancing themselves from the regime. So taking the CCP's attack on Xinjiang as an example, and I know you've also done investigative reporting that shows that this attack doesn't just happen in America, it happens around the world. What allows it to financially keep up its attack on Xinjiang?
Well, you have to remember the way the Chinese Communist Party and any communist system recognizes information. What is the main enemy of any communist system? What is the very first thing they go after? They go after all voices of dissent. Shen Yun exposes the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuses. They have different parts of their show that expose the organ harvesting, for example. The very nature of the show, where they present the culture of China, the Chinese Communist Party has spent decades trying to destroy the traditional values of ancient China, things the CCP has waged war against. They're trying to bring it back. And so the CCP recognizes this as an ideological threat to its power. The same thing with Epoch Times. Of course, we criticize the Chinese Communist Party. We don't censor ourselves for it. They target us just the same. Any kind of communist country, when they take power, they try to destroy any voices of dissent. They go after the journalists typically first. The Chinese Communist Party, when they took power, first people they went after were the academics and anybody who held the culture they wanted to destroy. Now, a lot of the power from the Chinese Communist Party, though, is not internal. It's external. Inside China right now, the CCP is facing a lot of social upheaval. It's facing conflicts within its political system. Countries are decoupling their economies. The CCP went full in with Russia. That's backfiring on it right now, especially because they're getting looped in with sanctions. There's a brewing trade war. All of these things are weakening the Chinese Communist Party. But that's internal, right? That means their economy is weakening and such. In order to protect the internal weakening, they need an information campaign. They need to get rid of dissenting voices. They need to clear the way to get rid of controversy. And they're going after anybody who has been critical of them as a way of resolving that. Case in point, they've even gone after U.S. officials, sanctioning U.S. officials. During the COVID pandemic, when you had different officials around the world, in Australia, in Europe, in the United States, calling for investigations into the origin of COVID, which now we have a congressional report which says the most likely origin was a lab leak from China. The CCP tried blocking that by sanctioning government officials, including in the United States. They want to silence any voice of possible dissent, because it's these voices of dissent that create controversy. And the controversy is what creates the political operations, for example, sanctions and tariffs and what they call issues of risk, where investors don't want to put their money in China. The main power of the Chinese Communist Party as it currently stands right now is not internal, it's external. It's the businesses who the CCP still has ties with. It's the journalists the Chinese Communist Party can still puppeteer in different parts of the world. It's the YouTubers who work as propagandists doing fake travel blogs for China, making the Chinese Communist Party look as good as they can on social media. It's the TikTokers and things like that. That is the main power of the CCP, because the ideological force is what lets them get foreign investment, and foreign investment is what they need to continue propping up their system.
Josh, along the same lines here, one last question for you. We're seeing in that report right before you came on that TikTok is most likely going to get banned moving forward, and it's of course owned by a Chinese company. Now, on the campaign trail, Trump that he said he would not pursue a ban on TikTok. Now, in relation to everything we've discussed here, how do you see all of this playing out?
I'm aware that Donald Trump has said that he does not want to ban TikTok. He was critical of it when he was on the campaign trail. I believe that will change. Trump's appointee to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has stated publicly that he intends to ban TikTok. And again, the FCC will probably oversee a lot of that. Also, Congress is relatively in agreement, Democrats and Republicans. They want to get rid of TikTok. I do think that Trump was saying things to the campaign trail that may not reflect once he actually hears the security information and gets briefed on what TikTok is. When it comes to TikTok, my main point would be this. Go back and look at the parent company, ByteDance. Go back and look at what ByteDance was. ByteDance, the head of that company, right before TikTok went public, wrote a public paper in China, a self-criticism, where they vowed, the head of ByteDance vowed that they would use their company to serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. They wrote this publicly. And I think we understand the way that, again, algorithms can be manipulated in terms of what they show to people, the way they can promote unhealthy content, like TikTok, for example, promoting challenges of people stealing cars and then wrecking cars. TikTok, for example, doing challenges of kids putting bleach on their eyes to change their eye color, which actually causes permanent eye damage. TikTok promoting self-harm to children, while they have different algorithms in China on their version of it, promoting healthy content. You can't say absolutely out. The algorithms demonstrated publicly that we can see serve unhealthy content, damaging content, criminal content abroad, and safe, healthy, good for kids type content within China. And I think, again, when it comes to the algorithms and intentional manipulation of information, understanding that the vow of the former head of that company stating that they want to use it to support the CCP and its interests, including directly to Xi Jinping himself under the Chinese Communist Party, I think the writing is on the wall. You can't ignore it. And I do think that they will move to ban it because of this.
I think when you really shed light on it all, it's astounding the reach that the Chinese regime has around the world right now. And as you said, they have shown their hand in their attack against Shenyun. And here's to hoping that the American people realize that the threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses to American values and to American freedom. Joshua Phillip, investigative reporter at the Epoch Times. Thanks for joining us today.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you.